Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Apologies that we are a little late getting started. I see we have some comments for our guests. We're waiting for us, so my apologies. That was on my end. Thank you for joining us this morning. Civility Partners is a consulting firm focused on building positive, thriving work environments, and we do Catherine's Corner every Thursday. Today, I have Dr. Andrew Woods. Thank you so much for being here with me.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. So you have a book called The Audacious Ask, Entrepreneurship and the Power of the Ask, and you teach entrepreneurship at the BCIT in Vancouver, Canada. You're a visiting professor in Shanghai, China. That's so awesome. So let's talk about the power of the ask today. So tell us a little bit about your book and why you decided to write it. Let's start there.
Well, I noticed a trend among students. I've had the opportunity. You mentioned in the introduction. I've had the opportunity to work, live, and teach in multiple different countries, and I found one common trait that was kind of across cultures is that people had wonderful ideas, but they were scared to. Maybe not scared is the wrong word, but they didn't have that last piece, which was the execution and the asking for things that would help them get to the next level. So
Mm-hmm.
taking a little bit further, I was speaking with one of my colleagues, Tori Wichar, his name is, and we realized that we had we were coming up with the same ideas that people weren't following through. And I went out and I spoke with a bunch of entrepreneurs, and I said, tell me when you actually pushed yourself out of your comfort zone and asked for something, and what was the result?
Mm-hmm.
And the answers were just incredible. And I looked at Tori and I said, we've got something here. We got something great here.
Yeah.
How can we? And so it began trying to coach students, and it evolved into helping people that were just trying to make that step, into entrepreneurship and go for it. So it's been a fun journey, and we've met a lot of really interesting people along the way.
Yeah. So by the way, everyone listening in, feel free to ask questions while we're chatting. So I guess there's probably a link between courage and resilience and being willing to ask. So is that part of what you cover in your book or
Yeah, we dive into that, and I mean, when you really think about it, I think the asking of questions, what's the outcome? So
Mhm,
if someone's going to accept, they're going to reject, or they're going to counteroffer. Accept,
mhm,
reject, counteroffer. What's
mhm.
the worst that can happen? I
Right.
like no's, but every time I get a no, I always ask, well, why? And I try to
Mhm,
use that piece of knowledge to move me forward.
mhm.
So yeah, I mean, it is resiliency. It's just like sales. You have to realize that for every 100 pitches, 99 are going to go sideways, and you just got to keep persevering. But it's a life skill, and once you get comfortable with it, you will
Mhm.
see you start to move forward much more rapidly.
So there's a curiosity component then as well that and not being afraid to be curious. I think most business owners probably do not go back to the no's from their sales and ask really what happened. Can you tell me why it was a no so I can learn from this? I feel like as an owner myself, I do often ask that. But it's a skill that has been honed in over time. I think there's courage that has to come with the like what are they going to say and kind of some shame because they said no, and you have to recognize it wasn't about you personally if you're in sales. So I think there's some courage and resilience that has to come with asking a question like
Definitely,
that.
perseverance.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So tell us a little bit more about you. So what does your work look like when you're working with clients, and or is it all teaching? Tell us a little bit more
No,
about you.
no. Love teaching. Teaching is a hobby that I I enjoy very much. I enjoy watching people develop. It comes with challenges, but I love it. But what I really do is I go. I'm sort of what you'd call a corporate trainer. So
Hmm.
I started a business 20 plus years ago in the UK. I'm originally from Canada, but I went on a 2-week holiday that lasted 17 years through curiosity. I started my career as a chef, and I wanted to travel throughout Europe, learning different skills And then I became obsessed with culture, and then I became obsessed with service. And I
Mhm.
realized when I got to the UK that the caliber of customer service was what you used to see in the old shows like Faulty Towers and that mocked UK customer service. So I set up a business teaching what I called creating legendary service, which was teaching organizations how to use their incredible assets, which are their people, to
Uh-huh.
develop them to give service. And I realized more and more that that's the edge. That's what, especially now, actually, if we look at now in times of high tech, what is your advantage? It's the
Mhm.
human touch.
Mhm.
So I developed that, and it expanded and evolved into clients saying, well, you're really great at service. Can you do sales? Can you do? And I was kind of teaching myself along the way.
Mhm.
um, Grew that business and then sold it, and decided to do an MBA and kind of figure out how I ran this business, but didn't really know what I was doing, and it was just a lot of luck and a lot of right place and right time. Formalized that education, and then became very friendly because I was so curious in the mid 2000s about the rise of China, and I
Yeah.
was reading so much about it that my classmates who this was in Wales in the UK, my classmates from China, and the bulk of the MBA were people from China. They weren't. I noticed they weren't mixing a lot with the local, Welsh students. So I
Mhm.
went in and I kind of made friends with a lot of them and learned a lot about the culture. And then I was invited to go and live in China, and that was just a phenomenally interesting, amazing, mind-expanding experience that I
Yeah.
you know. So a lot of traveling, a lot of moving around, and a lot of training in different environments, different countries.
I love that. And so you've been to a lot of countries, you've taught in a variety of countries. What are I think you said four continents in your bio, and what are some of the differences you see in terms of the willingness to ask, the perseverance and resilience that comes with that skill?
Um, Okay, so let's use China as an example. There's a couple of things I noted that I note between Canada, for example, and I would guess it would be similar in the United States as well. Is In China, change is rapid, so they embrace a lot of technologies. This might be a generalization, but they seem to embrace a lot of technologies. So we're sort of classified as a leader in AI in the Western world, but in
Mhm.
deploying that AI, it seems to be much faster in Asia,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of different attitudes towards certain things. Family is a huge part of Asian culture, and I'm not saying it's not in the United States or Canada, but it's just a different, a unique closeness. In China, in particular, with the one child policy, you
Mhm.
have a lot of there's only one child, so you have like multiple generations looking after this one child.
Mhm.
So I've
Mhm.
noticed that change was big. The attitude towards education was very different. And again, it's not. I can compare between. I did a lot of work in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East,
Mhm.
and there's just differing attitudes towards education, embracing change, and back to the title of the book. There's different attitudes towards risk taking,
Mm.
and I kind of equate asking and going out on a limb to risk taking.
Mhm.
So it's been
Yeah.
fascinating for me to kind of move around and train and make a lot of mistakes. I've made a lot of cultural mistakes myself when teaching in these locations, but it was just such an incredible learning curve. And now that the pandemic looks like it's kind of in the rearview mirror, I'd like to say, and people are getting back to training. I'm looking forward to doing more global stuff again.
Yeah, looks like Paul and I were on the same. I'm going to put Paul's question here. We were on the same page there. Great minds, Paul. Great minds. So he was asking. He asked the question a little bit differently. What can you give us an example of something we really need to keep in mind when we're making an ask in terms of intercultural communication?
Well, yeah, I mean, I see here it says ask and say China. Okay, so let's use that as an example. There's a lot more kind of harmony in that society in the sense that people don't like to be. They're direct. It's really hard to explain, but Chinese people can be extremely direct in some ways and
Mhm.
indirect in others. So
Mhm.
I found that a lot of people wouldn't tell you no, but you needed to read between the lines that a yes very often meant, or a let's talk about this later very often meant, and it took me years to figure this out, really. I'm
Hmm.
an optimist by nature, so when someone says yes, I'm right in there and I'm excited, and I've already counting the proceeds and the
Yeah.
preparing everything before it's actually happened. But definitely understanding the culture. I mean, before I went to China, I read hundreds of books, and nothing prepared me for what I actually experienced on the
Yeah.
ground.
Yeah.
But I did understand the notion that yes and no, and also differing ways of looking at contracts. Contracts sometimes are signed, and it's the beginning of a negotiation, not the end of the negotiation, as it might be in the West. So again, that the society is changing so rapidly, and the younger generations. I had a chance to teach the kind of mid '90s, born in mid '90s generation a few years ago, and very different from their parents and grandparents. But you just need to be prepared, and you need to do your research, but then realize that whatever you research, you got to keep an open mind that it might be a little bit different, and get as much intelligence on the ground as possible. I mean, speak to everybody when you're
Yeah.
there. Never miss an event to go out and like to a chance to go out and network and learn from people that have been there longer than you.
Is it considered rude in some cultures to ask? I mean, if I'm pitching to a company in Wales or China or anywhere, is that a possibility that asking what happened, why did you say no? Is there? I feel like some cultures there's got to be especially in a collectivistic culture,
Mm.
one where the squeaky wheel is not a good thing. What is there? Some examples of that where
Sure.
you have to watch out about not being rude when you're asking.
Certainly, I'll use this for UK society. Is that when I went over to the UK selling my own wares at the beginning, I was a little bit more, a little bit more forceful in my way of like calling people more often and not waiting and being impatient. And I found that that rubbed people up wrong. And then when I went to Hong Kong, I found the opposite. If you didn't jump on something quickly, you'd lose the deal. So I
Mm,
remember the cultural or the reverse cultural shock of spending a couple of years in Hong Kong doing business that was very dynamic and very go go go, and then coming back to Vancouver and reaching out to people saying, "I'm Andrew. I run this training company. I want to come and develop. I want to come and work with you," and then calling them the next day and saying like, "Oh, about that email I sent yesterday," and that would just rub everybody up wrong.
mm,
Whereas in Asia, I would lose the contracts if I wouldn't be always on the case. At least
okay.
that was my observation. So,
So
so
we're back to just paying attention to the culture, reading between the lines, observing, and then starting to behave in the ways that they're kind of copying them.
mm.
So Robin's got a great question. I see we've got a couple others. So thanks. Keep the questions coming. So what are the potential benefits of asking? So the short answer, of course, is they'll say yes, and you'll get what you want. But what else?
Well, I want to hammer home what I said before is that when they say no and you follow up, it's a great opportunity for you to learn where you're going wrong.
Yeah.
I encourage my students very often, they're applying for jobs and they say to me, well, I'm applying for a job and no one's got back to me. And I'm like, well, did you call up, ask who the hiring manager was and get a phone call into them?
Hmm.
Did you take it one further? Did you staple a Starbucks card to your resume and say, hey, go have a coffee on me and maybe you can give me some feedback? I mean, these are all kind of out there ways of doing things, but when you're competing against 400 people in that process,
Hmm.
it makes you stick out in people's minds as long as you have the skill set to go with it. So the potential, I mean, asking for, Catherine, I didn't know you before, and I watched some of your work, and I was very impressed by your webinars and some of your LinkedIn learning, and I wanted to reach out to you. I
Yeah.
reached out to you. What did I do? I asked, can I be on your show? Now you could have easily shot me down. And I would have then said why, and hopefully you would have given me that answer. But it's all about putting yourself out there and going for things. We have a saying in Canada from a very famous Canadian hero, if you will, who is Wayne Gretzky, is an ice hockey player. Of course, a good Canadian boy will bring up Wayne Gretzky.
Yeah.
And he said, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take."
Right.
And
Right.
it's so true, right? I mean, what's the worst that can happen? Like I said before, they can accept, decline, or counteroffer. So the
Yeah.
benefits of asking are learning more about what you're doing right or wrong, but maybe getting to that next level.
Yeah. So I have a question for you. So far, we've talked a lot about kind of asking when you get a no. You know, you got to know whether in sales or as a professional, and then you ask why. But does your book cover other scenarios? I'm thinking, for example, in the context of gender situations or racial situations at work, where you know, if I don't get that promotion and I sense it's because I'm a woman, you know, those kinds of things. Is there eh, and there certainly is a power dynamic between men and women or
Oh,
people
for
of
sure.
color and white people. So I'm just curious, your thoughts on that.
We dive more into the individual's experiences. So, and the short answer is no, we don't really cover that. We cover more when entrepreneurs in particular kind of push the envelope a little.
Hmm.
You know, we interview one guy, Nazar Akil, who was on the Shark Tank a few years ago.
Hmm.
Um, and this is another ask, right? You know, I watched the Shark Tank because I like to talk about it with my classes, and I was watching, and for those of you that don't know, it's a show entrepreneurs and people pitching to entrepreneurs. And I watched a wonderful pitch where Mark Cuban, one of the successful entrepreneurs, invested in the company, reached out to the guy on LinkedIn, said, "Hi, you don't know me. I just want to ask a favor. I want to learn from you, and my students want to learn from you. Would you be interested in being interviewed for this book?" And of course, the answer is yes. Why not? You know, I think that's
Yeah.
the other thing is that people want to help people.
Yes.
You can sometimes get people at the wrong time, and maybe they might reject you, but they might not. They might not further down the road. So the book was looking at exploring kind of when people got out of their comfort zone, as this fellow did. You know, he launched his company. He went to a trade show in Las Vegas. He yelled out to Shaquille O'Neal, the famous basketball player, as he's walking by, "I think you need to see my product." He turned around, came over. He wound up working with him in the future, being one of his partners. If you don't do
Wow.
it, you don't get it.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great example. I'm now you've got me thinking about all the asks I made, especially, I mean, this is our 14th year in business, but definitely at the beginning, a lot of asking people, could I meet you for coffee and
Mm.
kind of an informative interview? I want to understand. I heard you mention you got a big client. I want to know how you got that client because I want clients like that, or just anybody who had anything that I kind of wanted. I wanted to meet with them and find out how did you get that and help me. And people are more than willing to talk about themselves. Everybody
Oh, for
loves
sure.
to share their
Everyone's favorite
story.
topic. Yeah.
Everyone's favorite topic. That's exactly right. Let's see. We have um, another question. Do you have any tips for a freshly graduate professional to speak up in a corporate environment?
Um, I guess you can't ask a counter question, or
You
I'm
can ask
wondering.
a counter
Okay,
question.
I'm wondering, is this so you're actually working in a corporate environment, or are you looking to get into a corporate? Do you have any tips for a fresh? Um,
I could go
again,
back to the courage question, perhaps. That if
yeah, the
you're
courage
brand
question.
new,
I think culturally it depends on where you are as well. So we hit on that earlier in the present or the interview, is it depends on where you are. So I think, and I could be wrong, and it depends on your boss. And these are generalizations, but in the United States or in Canada, maybe in Europe, we can put forward our comments more freely generally,
mhm,
and they'll either be shot down or they'll and there might be a reason as well. I found, back to the China example, back to working in some other countries in Asia, is that it was very top-down driven. So the bosses, and again, this is changing, but the bosses in some of the companies that I did my doctorate research in
mhm,
were very much, this is my idea, and very few people, if any, would challenge said idea. So
mhm.
my advice is, what do you have to lose? Give it a try. Speak up, speak your ideas, and then you get an idea of whether that's the right place you want to be at and continue, and whether it's the right culture for you. But certainly put yourself out there. Why not?
I would echo that. And the question asker says, "I'm looking to get into the environment," but yeah, you can't. That we're back to the same thing. Whether you're an entrepreneur or new into the world of business, just out of school, you need to have informative interviews with anybody. Reach out on LinkedIn to people who have the job title you want, and then the future job title you want, and find out. I'm sure they'd be happy to talk with you. And I agree. You got to speak up in meetings and speak up when you have an idea, and if they keep poo-pooing your ideas and you're speaking up, then you don't belong there. Go somewhere else where your ideas are welcomed.
But sorry, just to add to that, getting in there. So getting into that environment is what I mentioned earlier. Is look at ways to differentiate yourself. Don't be
Mhm.
discouraged when you get rejected. Realize you're competing against 200, 300 people. They might not even looked at your resume, but
Yeah,
do something to differentiate yourself. Reach out to the hiring manager. Send a person. You know, I've gotten clients, and it's a bit old school, by putting my brochure into a FedEx to the CEO. I know they're going to open it. I know they're going to see it. So
yeah,
it's that kind of way of differentiating yourself when they're getting hammered by so many other things. How do you get to these people? You know,
yeah.
find a way to differentiate yourself.
Yeah, the bulky mail idea. Nobody opens envelopes anymore, but if it's a little package, they're going to be curious to find out what's in there.
For sure.
I haven't thought about this in years. A guy I went to college with, I lived in the dorms with him my freshman year, and then he was, my friend group here in San Diego. There's a freeway exit, Sorrento Valley, and just all the financial Qualcomms up there, AT&T, and he stood on the freeway with
Love
a
it.
sign that said, "I can't get a job. I'm looking for one." And he had his resume and he handed it out to anybody. Of course, he got lots of job offers for being so innovative in and I think he was even on the news.
For sure.
It was awesome. Okay, here's another great question. As I settle into my new role in a business management position, I find myself frequently experiencing imposter syndrome, which sometimes hinders me from fully engaging and seeking help. Guidance on how to overcome this challenge and feel more confident. So we're back to that word, confidence. There has to be confidence in the ask.
The question would be, why do you have imposter syndrome? If you're doing a great job and you're working hard, you're learning on the job as you go along. There's no need to have imposter syndrome. I mean, I don't know your situation. It might be unique, but I think that, just believe in yourself, and you got there, you got the title. Put yourself out there and move forward. I mean, there's times I mentioned earlier that my company would evolve in different directions, and I'd be asked to teach things that were maybe out of my comfort zone, and I just make sure I'd have imposter syndrome too, but I'd make sure to be the most knowledgeable person that I could be on that subject, and just work through it. I think
Yeah.
everybody has levels of imposter syndrome as they go through their careers. I wouldn't worry about that. I just push on.
Yeah, you know what, Christine? I'm gonna add to that too. This imposter syndrome came up, I think last week or the week before also. And my thoughts on that phrase are that I'm not sure. I don't want to put you down or say you shouldn't have it, because like you said, Andrew, we don't know you, but that we all live outside of our comfort zone all day every day. And so I'm not a fan of that phrase imposter syndrome, because it insinuates that we're all supposed to know everything 100% when we're doing our jobs. And every day is different for me, and I'm always learning. And if you're not learning, then you're not in the right job. You should always be challenging. So I'm not a huge fan of that phrase. So don't see it as imposter syndrome. See it as, I'm out of my comfort zone and I'm learning, and my company trusts that I will learn and do my job well. So that's my advice. Okay, we have to. You're welcome, Christine. She says thank you. Okay, we've got one other. I'm gonna hit one other thing. I hear what you're saying about having the courage to speak up, but I think of cultures like Japan, where doing that will attract career limiting judgment and silent criticism. The nail that sticks up will be hammered down. Oh, thanks, Paul. But I guess it's more of a comment. Thank you, Paul, and that's kind of what we were getting at before, that there's a level of risk that comes. But your answer to that, I think, Andrew, was pay attention, and there's ways to get what you need without being the nail that sticks up.
Adapt to the culture that you're in.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you all for joining us. It looks like there's a couple other questions coming through, Andrew. So, Andrew, I'm going to volunteer you to come back to this page and answer those questions. And you can absolutely reach Andrew on LinkedIn, of course. And
Please
Andrew, what's
do.
your website?
Website is theaudaciousask.com. It's more of a site about the book, so they can have a look, theaudaciousask.com. Please reach out on LinkedIn. I mean, we're talking here about asking things. Just reach out. Might take me a day or so to get back to you. I apologize, but just reach out, and let's continue the conversation.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. And thanks again for being here with me today. And thank you, Jenny. She's posing as me, posting the SHRM activity ID. So if you need HR recertification credits, there's an activity ID there for you in the chat. And thanks all, and we'll see you next week.
Fantastic. Thank you.